All right, family. We black again with the general. You already know we got the most powerful presentations, analysis, commentary, dialogue on international, national, regional, local news reporting of anything related to black people that matter. If it matter, if it's about some black power, we talk about it hour after hour over here. And we're going to be talking about why Egypt and Ethiopia are on the brink of war. On the brink of war. And got to talk about that. And before we get started, I want you to make sure you get over there to Patreon. We got that work over there waiting on your family. Dropping today, tomorrow, actually, the Islamic Comedic Order. You should be in the house. The visuals is mind blowing. Nobody do it better. You have never seen it nowhere, no how like the general drop it. So you most definitely want to get over there and get your mind blown with the truth. All right, why Egypt and Ethiopia are on the brink of war, and this speak really to was even in the ancient times, he who controls the source, the mouth of the Nile is the master. He who controls the source of the Nile is the master. You see, because he can cut, it's like going to that faucet and turning it off, family. You can turn it off. And so that's and so knowing that, see, you seeing even now what's going on now was also a part of the ancient politics. That's why Egypt tried to go up and get as many forts into Nubia as possible. But even then, it still only went to a certain point. But they was also trying to secure certain gold mines and precious resources. There's a lot of resources in the Sudan. Even in ancient time, they knew that. And so they would try to secure, you know, certain strategic points on the Nile. But when it comes to that water, unless you control the source of the Nile, you are beholding to the Ethiopians for, being the masters of the river. That's almost like a choke point. Okay. That's like a choke point where you can choke somebody out. You could choke somebody out by dam in the river, and in Egypt don't get no rainfall. So you talking about almost 95% of the water that goes into Egypt come from Ethiopia. Even though you got the two Nile, the White Nile is the longest. You see, the blue Nile, but the blue Nile come out of Ethiopia. Lake Tana is the source of the blue Nile, and then you got the White Nile, and the source of the White Nile is the criminally renamed Lake Victoria. Okay, there is no Lake Victorias in Africa. This is the criminally renamed Lake Victoria, and the Africans, depending on what nation you're in, they got their own particular name for the lake. You see, I think one of them was the Mwanza, Naza Mwanza, some similar to that, but uh, 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 that's just one nation. So depending on where you at, it's about 4 or 5 nations that border Lake Victoria. So they all got different names for it. But anyway, that is the source of the White Nile. And so, and they both come down and they meet at Khartoum, which is elephant tusk. You see, they meet at Khartoum, and at Khartoum in Sudan, they become one river, and it flows down to the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea, in Egypt, and so Egypt is the mouth, it's not the source of the Nile, but it is totally dependent on the Nile for water. You see, and so they feel very threatened by the Ethiopians, and I'm quite sure the Ethiopia understand that, and so I'm quite sure that they don't have, because that would bring war, and it probably gonna bring in, it's gonna be then you got Sudan in the middle, and that's probably, and so I doubt very seriously that'll probably be a 3, 4, 5, you got Egypt, then you got Sudan, then you got Ethiopia. It probably gonna bring other African. That'll probably be a regional war. That probably be a regional war. Now, looking at the military, I just say what it is. Not that I'm siding or anything, but Egypt has a far more advanced military. That don't mean they'll win at all. That don't mean they'll win at all because Ethiopia didn't kick a whole lot of ass down through the ages. And it was, I was at Ottawa. I went to Ottawa where uh what was his name? It'll pop in my head. It wasn't Menelik. It was it might have been Menelik the second. He whooped the Italians at Ottawa. And I just seen it just yesterday. But he whooped it. That's why they came down there in World War II and wanted to, after they didn't got all type of chemical warfare and airplane, they got their ass kicked that first time. And they wanted to revenge that loss, so they went down there and and did some wicked shit on Ethiopia. But so they didn't fought and won against odds. So that don't mean nothing. That don't mean nothing. And they held out on them the second time. Yes, they had some atrocities, but they never really took over Ethiopia. They had the city, but you know, out in the rural areas, the guerrillas still controlled that. So they never colonized or took full control. They occupied Ethiopia, but they never took over Ethiopia. You know what I'm saying? So Ethiopia has never been colonized, it never been colonized. And so that's one of the, so it, it would be a hell of a fight. It would be a hell of a fight. I tell you that, and I would be most definitely siding with Ethiopia. You feel me? Most definitely, I would most definitely be siding with Ethiopia against Egypt. Period. You can't. Because y'all not even. If you was of the bloodline, you wouldn't have to worry about that. You know what I'm saying? You wouldn't have to worry about that, but because y'all know y'all then had atrocities against the South, because even when you go back, them Arabs and them British, they have come down in unison, to attack Sudan, attack Ethiopia. And so, you probably, feel that, it might be some animosity, which it is, and that's why they so aggressive towards Ethiopia. But, you know, uh I mean, I don't see why Somalia and the rest of them would not side with Ethiopia. Sudan, I don't see why they wouldn't side with Ethiopia too against Egypt. You see what I'm saying? So is brewing, and I saw videos seeing the power of the Egyptian military. They got naval, they got they got airplanes, and that's critical. That's goddamn critical. And I think they even threatened maybe to blow the dam out of there. You know what I'm saying? And so, you know, again, hopefully, it don't come to no dumb shit, real talk. Because that's some bullshit. I mean, look what Egypt did. Look what the Arabs did when they put that Aswan Dam in there and flooded out all the Nubian villages and shit. They didn't give a goddamn. So I mean, sometimes retribution come in, it come like karma come like that. You feel me? But anyway, family, I appreciate y'all. Make sure y'all get over there to Patreon. We're gonna be dropping the Islamic Comedic Order. We're gonna be looking at the ancient Egyptian foundation of Islam, thieving like all the rest. So I want to blow your mind with visuals that you cannot see nowhere else on the planet. Come get to work, family. See you in a minute. I'll be right back. Black Power.